What's up, Covalence friends? Today, we're going to be setting up a deployment pipeline and some continuous integration with CircleCI and Google Cloud Platforms. This is going to be part one of a two-part series. If you have not subscribed, make sure you hit that subscribe button below before watching this series so you can get part two when it comes out, but we're going to jump right into it. All right, so the first thing we got to do is actually set up all of our accounts. So this is actual CircleCI.com. So CircleCI is basically just, in my opinion, a out-of-the-box continuous integration option for you. And we are going to be integrating this with GCP. Now, GCP is Google Cloud, and it is probably my favorite hosting service at the moment. And I found it a little bit difficult to integrate with CircleCI well, especially with the way that GCP deploys node environments in particular. And so what we're going to do is, what you would actually do is you click the go to application, you would log in using your GitHub account. I've already done that, so I can't actually recreate or redo the login process or the account creation process because CircleCI freaks out. Do not try and manage using different email addresses, because once you try and hook up your code, it just errors all over the place. So just create one account with CircleCI and then hook up your organizations. Basically do everything through GitHub. GitHub is more or less the auth that CircleCI uses for everything. Unless you're deploying for something like Bitbucket or something like that, we could do a separate video on that. But for this particular instance, we are going to be deploying from GitHub. So if you are going to be deploying multiple projects from GitHub, just use one account. If you have projects on Bitbucket, you could probably have a separate account for CircleCI in doing that. But basically, any project that you deploy on CircleCI from GitHub, you're pretty much going to have to use the same CircleCI account, at least something that I've found. So if you go to the actual application, you'll basically go to a little area that looks like this. It'll take you to a dashboard. We have no pipelines. And if we look at our projects, we actually haven't set up any of our projects either. So basically, we're going to be setting up this repository. It's CircleCI GCP. And so when you actually go to set this up, you can deploy directly from a branch, but there needs to be a config file in that branch. And so we don't have that config file right now, so we're just going to have it set up this project right now, and we're going to select node. And basically, this is what it comes to. This is actually what the screen is on. I know you guys probably can't see this super well. The zoom doesn't work very well, but basically this is just a config file. It's an example config file. So what we're going to do is we're basically just going to copy this config file and then just go back to the projects. And we're going to pop open our repository down here. And we are going to now create our own CircleCI folder. So you could have CircleCI do this for you. It's not my favorite way to do it. I kind of like setting up my own config.yml. So it is just a YML file. I went ahead and I just copied the code that they gave me in here. And also orbs, basically they're, it tells you exactly what they are right here. They're reusable packages. That is a pre-configured environment for CircleCI. And this is 4.7, but I believe we're at the time of this video, I think we might be further than this, but this is the last one that I remember using. So we're at least at 5.0.3. And they come out with these new orbs all the time, so you can always check back on CircleCI's website and figure out exactly what orb they're on, at least for Node. So we're going to be using Node. And what we're going to be doing is we're just going to be deploying our bare bones Express TypeScript repo to GCP. And as you can see here, I've already cloned it. I went ahead and I've just changed the name to CircleCI, but you can literally install this as a Covalence template. And you can go ahead and just run this out of the box, right? So again, it's pretty simple. You download it. It has a post-install script that just runs Webpack. And when we deploy it, we're going to be doing the npm start. But if you're running it on dev, you're going to do an npm run dev, and you can run it locally, and you're good to go, right? All right, so we have our config.yml now. Let's go ahead and just open up a terminal, and we're going to check this in. So git status, and we're going to get commit-am. And we'll put adding CircleCI config. So just going back to this, again, when you set up this project, you can go ahead and let CircleCI do it for you. It'll actually commit it to a new branch, but we just want it to run on the branch we're doing. Right now, you can see if I run git status, that we're actually on a branch dev, and I didn't even add the file. Look at that. So it's a good thing we came back here. But your branch is up to date with origin dev. So I have 2 branches. We can go ahead and just look at that real quick. This is our repo, CircleCI GCP, and we have a main branch and we have a dev branch, right? So if we go ahead and we actually add this to the dev branch this time, so we're going to get add, and then we're going to get commit, adding CircleCI, CircleCI config. Apologies for the typing, by the way. Usually I set up the microphone a little bit different, but you're probably going to hear a little bit of typing today. Sorry, guys. All right, so now we have actually pushed the config to our dev environment or our dev branch, and we can go back and we can pull up that just to make sure. Yep, we've had a push, so we now have what we need in dev, and we can go ahead and use, let's see if it actually can find this now. Yep, found on this branch, so we're going to set up the project. All right, so it actually does a sample workflow. This might fail because it might actually try and run a test, which I don't believe we have. And let's just see what happens. So if we click into this, we can actually see node test, and it's going to actually go through all of these things where it spins up the environment, it prepares environment variables, and you can actually see, yep, so we don't actually have a test, missing script test, so it fails, right? And so if we go back to our dashboard, right, we now have our pipelines, and we can see that the sample workflow failed, right? So what we can do is, real quick, just to make this thing pass, we are going to add a test script. So let's go ahead and add a test script, and let's just say echo test complete. Normally you'd be using something like jest. We probably should add jest into the template, to be honest. Just a little mental note there. But let's just echo test complete real quick. We're going to go ahead and we're going to commit this. And if we go ahead and rerun this workflow, we can rerun it from start, or we could rerun it from failed. But in this particular case, it's going to automatically rerun it because of how we have it set up. And it's basically basing everything off that config file, and I'll go through in detail what we need to do to change that config file to make it actually do what we want it to do. But if we pop back into this sample workflow real quick, you can see that node test is doing everything, and it actually completed. So it ran npm run test, it just echoed test complete, and bam, we have a complete success, right? So go back to our pipelines, and we can see that at least our pipeline is working now. So when we actually pushed, it automatically started that workflow, and what we can see is that in the config.yaml, we're not actually like filtering this job on any actual branch, right? So any push to any branch is going to run this workflow, which is really cool because you could have workflows that you want to run anytime there's a push anywhere, right? Now you might also have workflows that run only in particular branches, and we're going to rewrite this whole thing to work the way that we want it to. But you can see it's using like node version 16. This job right here is kind of like a predefined job. Now we can actually create custom jobs, which we're going to do, but in this particular one, this is just your node test, and it goes ahead and it runs the npm test command, and that's based off of your package manager here and your version here, right? So that's node version 16.10. I'm actually going to change this to 16.17.1 just because it works really well with GCP. And we're also going to go ahead and we're going to add our engines as well to the package.json. So we're going to add engines, and in here we're going to have node, and we're going to say 16.17.1. Now GCP is constantly upgrading their deployment process, and so you may not need to fix it anymore, but from what I understand, the best way to work with GCP is to actually fix your node version. And you kind of want to do that anyway. You want everybody running and testing things on the same node version. You can use something like NVM to do that. But again, I don't know exactly which NPM version it is. Let's just see what I have. Let's see, I have 8.3.2. Hopefully that's the same thing that's being used in 16. So 8.3.2. Let's just say that. It should be fine. And we are going to go ahead and we'll be fine with this. We can check this in if we want. It is going to start another pipeline, but let's go ahead and do it. So git commit, and we're just going to say updating config and engines. All right. So we have our repo set up now. We have our config file ready to go. We have our tests, right? Normally this would be something that actually is doing something and not just echoing text. But let's go ahead and continue. Now we need to actually set up GCP, right? So this is running. It should make a success at least. But if you go to GCP, you can see. Hopefully you guys can see this well enough. You don't need the actual particulars in here. This is my project, right? So I have CircleCI dev is just the name of my project. And when you log in, you can go to console.cloud.google.com. And up here is where you actually manage which project you're on. So I'm on Covalence's organization. You may not have an organization. It's fine if you're just a solo developer. And you can still create projects. So you do new projects. Now what I like to do is I like to separate out separate projects for dev and production. Some people keep it all in the same. I don't know why. I think it's horrendous. I like having separate projects for these things. It's a little bit more configuration up front, but by far it's the best way to do it in my opinion. Again, this is all just personal preference though. There isn't really a standardization or a recommendation by Google, but I've just had the most success with this particular method of actually having my dev and my production within separate projects, because it keeps everything isolated, it keeps everything separate. You can actually have separate IAM permissions, and so only certain people could access prod, and it just makes things a lot cleaner. So again, we're on the dev branch right now. Right now we're going to be setting up the dev stuff. So what you first thing you have to do is actually hook up a billing account. We already have a billing account with Covalence, but I would go in there. You get $300 to $400 free credits, so we're definitely not going to be spending anywhere near that. So definitely go in there. There's a free trial period. It's awesome. You can use literally everything they have during that free trial period, or up to the amount that you spend. But you definitely want to be careful with how you set things up, because for instance, you could set up a SQL server or a MySQL instance that could literally blow through $1,000 in a month easy. So look into the documentation and make sure that you set up the smallest instances, especially for a dev environment. But the first thing that we want to do is we actually want to enable some APIs. So you go to APIs and services, and usually it closes this. Let's see, I'm just going to go to library. All right, so we can search for, and what we want to look up is App Engine, and it should pull up the App Engine admin API. I'm sorry, you guys probably can barely see this, but if I zoom in any further, the formatting of everything kind of goes to crap. All right, let's see. We'll just try it anyway. So App Engine API, and it pulls up the actual App Engine admin API here. You go ahead and click that, and we just enable it. And so it's going to actually turn on this API here. What this is going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to programmatically interact with the App Engine, right? So the App Engine is what we're going to be using to deploy the instance. And so App Engine is super cool. It's basically just a kind of like AWS's Elastic Beanstalk. It's essentially just a pre-configured environment for your app to run, and it allows you to basically just write code and commit it, which is amazing, right? So you don't have to deal with a lot of the setting up of instances and having load balancers and all that, right? So it has all of that already pre-configured, and it's super cool. So let's go ahead and go back. We now have that API enabled, so we can now actually set up our App Engine instance. So we go down to serverless App Engine, and for some reason it does not want to auto close for me. Oh, it's probably because I'm so zoomed in. That's the issue. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and create an application. So get started. We can go ahead and select our region, and it looks like we're going to do US Central, which is fine. Let's see, they also have a whole bunch of European ones, US East, US West. Let's do US West. I'm actually in the West, so I'm going to go ahead and use US West 1. Identity and API access. So we're just going to use our App Engine default service account, right? So that's just going ahead and it's going to create a separate service account just for our App Engine, which is exactly what we want, right? So it'll actually have default permissions and everything, so it's pretty nice, and it'll be exactly what we need. So it's going to go ahead and spin this up. It sometimes takes a little bit. It has to finish doing this on Google side, so it doesn't matter how fast your internet connection is, it has to do all this on its own. So in the meantime, while this is spinning up and actually creating this application, we are going to have to also go in and kind of create some separate like environment variables and things like that in CircleCI. So what we want to do is we want to go to this particular project and then project settings, and you can see that the environment variables are managed actually inside of this. So for each project, we're going to have environment variables. Now, when we actually do our production variables, we're going to put that in its own context inside organization settings, which is nice because again, CircleCI provides a layer of security where only certain people can access the organization settings. So if you can access the dev variables or the dev environment variables, you won't be able to access the production environment variables. And the way that it works is that the project level environment variables are used first, but then the organization levels can overwrite the project levels if you tell it to do that, right? So you actually have to use a context and it'll overwrite the project level environment variables. For the project level ones, we're going to start adding a few of them. And so what we have to do is, let's see, I have a list of things here. We have a Google Project ID. So we want to go ahead and you can name these whatever you want, but I'm just going to go ahead and do Google Project ID. And if we come in here, it looks like we have this set up. You can select flexible or standard. I'm going to go ahead and choose standard just because it's cheaper, but flexible is a super cool, actually let's just do flexible. I prefer flexible. It allows you to spin up more instances and things like that. And again, you can download the Cloud SDK, which is what you want to do, and this is how you would deploy it locally if you wanted to, but we're going to use CircleCI to deploy it. So this is super not necessary. You actually don't even need to, this is just literally setting up for documentation, so it'll take you to the correct link based off of what you choose here. If you look at this link, it's now standard, right? And if you change it to flexible, it just changes the link. So again, this is doing nothing for your actual project. It now just actually has, if I zoom out, you'll see that the menu, what's it doing here? Let's see. All right, this menu sometimes, for whatever reason, if I reload this page, it'll probably work. The menu should stay out. There we go. So yeah, the menu will stay out unless it's on a, let's see, activate. It should be activated too. I don't know what this is. Activate. Okay, so we've activated our free credits. Yay. All right, so again, we have this App Engine menu, and within this menu, we have important things like services, versions, instances, cron, jobs, task queues, right? So services is basically their idea of like a module. So if you had multiple microservices running your application, you would have separate services for your app, right? And so a great indicator I guess example of this would be if you had your front end and your API separated out into two projects, they would be two separate services, right? You could have a front end service, or you could use just the default as your front end service, right? Which is what a lot of people do, and then have an API as your secondary service, right? And so again, this is the App Engine area. Let's go back. We need to get the project ID for this, and this is our project ID here. And so we are now going to add that as the environment variable. So now we have our Google Project ID in there. We're also going to need the Google Compute Zone. So let's go ahead and add Google Compute Zone. And this is going to be, I believe I said US West 1. I think it was US West 1. Hopefully that's right. I don't remember now. And then, and we'll actually, when we deploy the app engine, we will be able to double check that, and we can just go back in there and change it if we need to. So let's go ahead and go back to this. Your app engine has been created. Versions is where we would actually see the deployed versions, and we'll get to that, and then we can actually look at our instances as well. And then finally, we have our Google App Service, right? So let's just go ahead. I'm going to call it gcloud app service, and we're just going to make it default, and that's just going to be the default app service name. So let's go ahead and add that in there as well, right? And so we have our environment variables. What we finally need is we need a service key. Now, the service key is basically a a unique key, a JSON key that will allow us to access everything. And so we need to go to the IAM panel of Google Cloud, and we can see right now that we have the owner and everything in here, and we're going to now, let's see, we want to add a key, so we need to actually find where we add the keys. Let's see, grant access, is this where it is? No, let's see. They change stuff around on me all the time here, so let's see. Service accounts. There we go. All right, service accounts. All right, so we have our service account here, and we're going to want to create a service account, and we can name the service account realistically whatever we want, but let's just call it, CircleCI service account ID, and we can just say all right, so we're going to create and continue. The role we want to do is we want to give it editor, and let's see if we need project. Actually, let's just see if there's a project editor. There's a ton of beacon attachment editor. That's not what I want. Let's see. Editor, owner, viewer. Editor should be fine, but we want it to be able to be project based. It used to be called project editor, but maybe they actually changed it to just be editor, right? So let's try editor. We may have to come back in. We may have to edit this if it doesn't actually work, but let's just give it editor for now. And then we can actually grant users access to this service account, but you don't need to do this. So you can go ahead and just click done. All right, so we have our CircleCI right here. That's the App Engine service account. So that was what was created with the App Engine. But now we can actually go ahead and we can, let's see, how do we get this key? If I click on it, does it do anything? Let's see, keys, add key, create new key, JSON. There we go. All right, so you go to keys, add key, JSON, and it is going to automatically download that JSON file to your computer. Let's go ahead and figure out where that is. All right, I got it in my downloads. I'm going to go ahead and just drop it in to my project. All right, you don't need to do this. I'm just doing this for the sake of an example. And so let's go ahead and if we want to, let's see, let's rename this thing to just gcloudkey.json. All right, and we're not gonna want to check that in. That would be the worst idea ever. But I want you to be able to see how we're actually doing this, because in our terminal now, we need to run a command to convert this to base64. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to, I'm on Windows, so this could be different on Mac, but we're going to cat gcloudkey.json, and we're going to convert it to base64, and -0. So now we actually have it converted to base 64, and we're going to need to just copy this thing. So copy. All right, and then this is what we're going to add to our environment variable. So we're going to add this in there, and this is going to be called the gcloud service key. You can name this Google service key if you want to keep everything. I don't know why I did gcloud and Google. You could do everything gcloud if you want, but for whatever reason, my brain is not working today. All right, so we have everything we need environment variable wise. Now what we need to do is we actually need to update configs and make sure that everything in our config file is going to be working to do what we want it to do, right? And so let's go back to our code, and we're going to, I'd like to just clear this. Let's just delete it for now. All right, and let's we go ahead and delete our gcloud key as well. You may want to save that key somewhere. I'm not going to right now, but it's probably a good idea to save that. You may need it later. And again, you could always create a new key too, and retire that key. So that's not a big deal. But again, we have our config file. We're going to want to pull this up because we're going to be changing this config file, and we're also going to be creating a file called new file. It's going to be app.yaml.sh. So the app.yaml is what's going to actually deploy our GCP instance. But what we're actually going to do is we're not going to check in the app.yaml. We're going to check in a shell file, and we're going to run that shell file in our config. So what we can actually do is we're going to I'm going to go ahead and just copy this real quick. But again, we're just going to echo this file here in the shell file, and then what we're going to do is we're actually going to copy this file, to the CircleCI instance when it checks it out. And what that's going to allow us to do is going to actually be able to allow us to dynamically create our app.yaml with our environment variables. So that's kind of the big issue here, is that we want to make sure that our environment variables are being added into this app.yaml. And the only way we can really do this is to run a shell file, right, and actually create the file dynamically. So again, we are going to just echo this, and it's going to now generate our app.yaml. Now, we have to run this file, obviously, and that's going to be done in the config.yml. So what we want to do is we want to start creating jobs. So we have our orbs, right? We have our node orbs, and we want to create our own jobs here. And so the way we do that is we just specify jobs, and then let's just call one job deploy, and we want to use a Docker image, and the image is going to be Google Cloud SDK. All right, let's zoom in just a little bit more for you guys. All right, so that's going to be our Docker image, and we can also do working directory, and it's going to be root of the repo. And finally, we're going to have steps, and the steps are going to be checkout. So that's going to check out the code. Let me go ahead and just turn this off real quick. All right, I'm going to check out the code, and then we're going to run some steps, or run a step. And so the run step, we're going to have a name, and it's going to be create app.yaml. And how we do it is with a command. And first off, we actually have to, so we have to chmod the shell, right? So chmod.x, and it's going to be app.yaml.sh. Oops, not percentage finish. There we go. Let me learn how to type. And we are going to run that now. So app.yaml.sh. And we're going to pipe it into app.yaml, right? So it's going to now create this app.yaml file. And so we're going to check out the code, and then we're going to create the app.yaml. And finally, we are going to run one more command, and it's going to be setting up gcloud. All right, and this command is going to be a long one, so let's just put it on a separate line. And we want to echo. I'm going to copy this because it's a lot, and I don't want to waste your guys' time showing you that I can type. But basically, you can go ahead and copy this in here. We want to echo this environment variable, the gcloud service key, which is that base 64 key that we just copied over, right? We want to decode it, and it's going to go into the gcloud auth command. Now we're using the gcloud, the Google Cloud SDK here, so it's actually going to know this command, and we're going to activate a service account using, a key file, and it's going to be setting the project ID here and using the Google Compute Zone here, right? And so we're doing US West 1. I hope that that's an actual compute zone. It may not be, but we're gonna shoot for it. We're gonna at least try it out. So again, this is our job, our deploy job, right? And we could also have, we're gonna add jobs to this. So we're gonna add some stuff to it over time. For right now, for just deploying initially, we don't need anything else. But basically, this is kind of the setup, right? So this job is basically setting up the deployment. We could continue to add steps if we wanted to, but personally, I kind of like just having this set up, and then we can actually do post steps in our workflows that'll allow us to actually deploy the app. So we want to make sure this works first, and then for a post step, that's kind of just in a way, it's more or less something that you can do, you might want to do, but you could also add it to this in particular. But to me, I find this more reusable to make any kind of reusable code in the jobs, and then anything that's one-off, I'm going to put down in the post steps of a workflow, right? So this is the sample workflow. Let's go ahead and kind of get rid of this sample workflow. I would like to, well, I guess we could have one more. It'd be test. We can do one more job. So again, let's do our test workflow, and let's see, we can have something called an executor, and it's going to be, we could do something kind of like this here, right? And just do this into the workflow itself, but I want to define it a little bit differently. I'm going to define my own job, my own test, and so let's go ahead and do node default and tag. We're going to do 16 at 17.1, and steps, we are going to first check out, then we're going to actually just run. The name is going to be run tests, and the command, we're going to do it on a separate line. And what we're going to do is I'm actually going to kind of copy part of this here. So I like to do this here, npm test, and then end the if statement. So this is an if statement, and basically we're saying that if it's not a pull request, then we're going to do the test. So if it's not a pull request, then we're actually going to run npm test. Otherwise, we don't want it to actually do the test. So again, this is in particular the way I like to do it. It would have to be more of like an actual approved check-in to run the test, right? Now, if you wanted to, you could have it do it regardless. So again, it's up to you. I'm just doing it this way just because that's how I usually do it. And it's because I think it's the way that makes the most sense, right? All right, so now we can actually start adding a separate workflow. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of remove this workflow. I don't need the sample workflow. I'm going to have a deploy workflow, and inside my deploy workflow, I'm going to have jobs, and we're going to say test. We're going to say name is just test, and then we can say filters, branches, right, only, and we're going to say main and develop, right, or sorry, dev, main and dev. So we have main and dev as being the branches that are going to be running this, and this basically filters out all the branches. You could add as many of these one here, or if you want this to run for every branch, you could do that as well, and you could just remove the filter, right? All right, so that's our actual test job, and then we could have our deploy job, and that's going to be our first one. We can say is deploy staging, right? And that's going to deploy to our dev project. And this one we can say that it requires, and it's going to require that we run the test job, right? So we want to run tests first, and once test passes, we're going to deploy staging, right? And now this is what I was talking about before, where we can actually get into post steps here. So it's going to run the deploy job, right, which is up here. So we have our test job and we have our deploy job. So it's going to run all these, it's going to check out the code, it's going to create our app.yaml, and then it's going to set up gcloud, right? And then after all of that is completed, right, after the test and then the deploy job, it's going to run these post steps. And so for post steps, what we want to do is we want to run, and we're just going to call this deploy the app. And the command is going to be gcloud app deploy app.yaml. And so it's going to use that app.yaml that we created, and it's going to deploy to gcloud using those settings, right? And what we want to do is we want to make sure that this filters only on the branch develop, right? So if you have multiple, if it's a list, you want to make sure that you add these little hyphens, but if it's only one, then you can just kind of add it directly right there, right? So again, this is for deploying our staging. It's only going to happen on develop, and, or sorry, not develop. I don't know why I have develop in my head, but it's dev, right? It's the dev branch, and it's only going to happen on the dev branch, and we're going to just gcloud app deploy app.yaml, and when we check this in, it should now actually should work, right? So let's see, we have our app.yaml.sh. You can get into this far more. I have a ... here. We probably need to add a few things to this, but let's just try and run it as is. There's a whole app.yaml like instance that we could do. Let's go ahead and actually just look that up real quick. If we go to app.yaml gcloud, so we have our app.yaml reference, configuring your app. Let's see, usually they have a pretty good, yeah, okay, so here we go. So we have our manual scaling, instances 1. We could also have automatic scaling, but usually they have a much better file on this. I swear I've seen it. Let's see, app.yaml reference. This is probably what I'm looking for. node.js. Yeah, okay, so here's all the actual, network settings, things like that. Session affinity, if you want session affinity, which is kind of like sticky routing, right, where we can actually have people hitting the same instance every time instead of using whatever instance is available. Resources, we could go ahead and we could add something like this. Probably a good idea, just because, again, we want the smallest possible thing here. So let's go ahead and just add this in there. Resources, CPU 2, memory gigabytes 2.3. This is about as small as you can get, but we want to make sure that we're saving money. So again, I don't know if that's the default, what it would by default to, but it's probably a good instance. If you want to do health checks, you could do it in here, right? So liveness checks, readiness checks. We don't have that set up in the repo, so I'm not going to worry about this, but I also highly recommend that you do this. And scaling options, we have automatic scaling here. This is pretty cool. Let's do this. So we're going to add this in there. Automatic scaling, min number of instances 1, max number of instances, let's just say 3. Cooldown period and CPU utilization, target utilization 0.6. That means that if your instance, let's say you only have one instance, right? If it gets up to 0.6 or 60% or utilization within the CPU, it's going to spin up another instance, right? And then if it drops back down, I'm pretty sure it's an average amongst all. So if one of them, if by average it drops below that, it will end up removing one of these instances. So the flexible scaling is super awesome how that works. and target current requests would just be 100 requests at the same time. So if that hits as well, then it'll spin up another instance as well. So it's basically a bunch of parameters that you're setting around when to spin up a new instance of your automatic scaling. So again, we have everything set up here. All right, let's go ahead and we're now going to just check it in and see what happens. So let's go ahead and just take a look. Get add -a, get status. It looks good. We have our change in our config and we have our new file. So get commit -am, setting up gcloud deployment. And we're going to push. So we push to our dev here. We're going to pop open our CircleCI environment. Let's go back. Unable to parse YAML. So I messed up something in the YAML file. All right, so let's go ahead and go back to it. That's always fun. Somewhere in here I messed it up. Let's see. I believe it might be this, but let's just double check. Yep, this has got to be it. Let's see. Let's go ahead and just pull all that over. Check out, run, command. Yeah, typically I like to indent this. I don't know why I didn't. So we have run name command. Yeah, so this all looks good now. All right, let's try this again. Kanji. All right, and we're gonna push, and we're gonna try it one more time. Let's see what happens here. Kind of wish you could just delete this. It's pretty ugly. All right, sometimes it takes a little bit. Hopefully I didn't break it permanently. Let's go ahead and just refresh, see what happens. Another error in config file. All right, 8 schema violations found. Wow. 2 schema violations found. All right, so it looks like we have workflows, deployed, jobs. All right, so somewhere I messed up again. Let's go ahead and look in our workflows. All right, so I may have something formatted incorrectly. Workflows, deploy, jobs, test. All right. Name, filters, branches, deploy, let's see, I want to push these over. It might just be it wasn't indented, which would be hilarious. But that is pretty normal with a lot of these YML files. Spacing matters. And so just make sure that you actually have everything indented correctly. So jobs, we have our test job. That's on its own line. We have our deploy job. Let's go ahead and check this in. Once again, fixing the YML error. Oh man, I have this down here too, so that could be another issue. Hopefully not, but you never know. Every time we push, it is going to start a new workflow, so we can go ahead and just see. All right, so it actually got that one. Yeah, again, it was an error in there. It was literally those two indentations. So now we're actually in business. Make sure everything is like, test coding and testing in general, like it has to be exact. But we're actually in our deploy staging now, and it is setting up our deploy app, which is now using the gcloud SDK. And you can actually watch the output in real time here. So we're enabling the service here. It is enabling the actual App Engine Flex, which is the first time we're deploying. Sometimes I feel like the first time of things always ends up messing up somehow, but we're gonna hope for the best here. But it's actually having to enable the service right now. So hopefully we don't get a timeout error. Timeout errors are actually possible in here. You gotta kind of finagle things a little bit. But if we go to our App Engine in here, we might be able to actually see it doing something. All right, so not yet. It's still enabling things. This could take a little while, so I might just kind of edit some of this out. We'll see though. We'll see how long this takes. Oh, I don't know why that's open. Kind of by default, always have dev console open. So on consecutive deployments, this wouldn't take as long just because right now it is literally enabling this. This hasn't been done yet on this account, and so right now this is probably just the longest it's going to take. All right, so finally it finished doing that. Now it's actually deploying the files. So it pushed the files, it's uploading them, and it's now doing its checksum and verification process. In the meantime, let's go real quick, and we want to kind of go through this file a little bit more just to kind of give you guys a little bit more of an understanding of what's happening here. So again, every time we push to the dev environment, or sorry, the dev branch, because of these filters and the way that this works, it's going to run this job test because deploy requires test. So this isn't going to run until test finishes, right? Once test finishes, it's going to run the deploy job, right? Our deploy job up here, and this is the test job, by the way, right? So we're running this test here. But our deploy job is basically just checking out the code, creating your app.yaml. And notice how we have checkout here as well. It's because these actually run in their own separate containers. So you can't just check out once when you're running within separate jobs here, right? So again, make sure you understand that. You're gonna have to check out the code twice. And also, if you create your app.yaml here, you're not gonna have your app.yaml here, right? And so you gotta make sure that you understand, it also works with gcloud auth, right? So this auth, we're gonna have auth set up within this container, but not if you have another job, right? So be careful about what you're doing in jobs and how you're separating jobs and all of that. But you can get really creative with this and you can do some really cool stuff. And when we set up our actual production as well, our production environment, that's going to be super cool as well. So we're going to see how that works, and we're going to add an additional layer to everything and add an approval process, which hopefully only a certain number of people would have access to and be able to approve the production and the swap over, right? So that's important, and I feel like that's a really cool feature with how we're doing the continuous integration here. All right, so let's go back and see how it's going. All right, so you can see here that it's installing, version 16.17.1. That's what we specified. It is doing a whole bunch of stuff that we don't care about. Oh, and it says done. So again, we found 0 vulnerabilities. Actually a little worried. Oh, here we go. Okay, so it did actually run the post install here, right? So it ran webpack post install. So it generated the files that we needed it to, and it now finished. Let's see if this ever ends. It does actually have to route traffic as well. We set it to, by default, it promotes automatically. And so it's probably doing that. It's probably trying to figure out some things, mostly just because this is the first time we're deploying this thing. So App Engine really hasn't been set up yet. Again, on consecutive deployments, this would happen significantly faster. I probably should have just had it deployed and then redeployed to show you guys, but you know what? We're doing it real time, and this is exactly how it would work when you guys are doing this for the first time as well. All right, so finally it finished. We got our deployed service. We have this link that I'll show you guys in a second. Once we go back to the App Engine dashboard, it should exist. But again, this took, it says 9 minutes, 4 seconds. I went ahead and cut out some of the intermediary part there because it was ridiculously long. This would not take this long again the next time. It just had to spin this up because it was the first time. And now you can actually see the dashboard is fully created. So we go to services, you'll see that we just have our default service here. If we go to versions, you can see that we now have a running version, and you can see that we can actually click into this and bam, we have our deployed Hello World app, and we have it in the West, right? So we get our unique URL. We can change this URL. We can give it, you know, if we go to settings, we can give it a custom domain, which would be cool, but you don't need to do that. It's a dev environment. Now, obviously in production environment, you'd probably want to do that, right? So we can go to instances. We can see that we have our instance here. It's healthy. And we can actually add health checks ourselves, which would be even better. And we are good to go, right? So we have our deployed instance, and every time we add code and check it in, it's going to redeploy. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope it was simple enough. I know we had 1 or 2 little minor hiccups in there, but honestly, you're developers, that's life in development. So again, we got it figured out. The end justifies the means, and we are good to go. So hope you guys like that. If you have any suggestions or thoughts on using CircleCI with Google Cloud Platform, feel free to drop them in the comments below, and we'd love to make some additional videos, but be on the lookout for part 2. And also check out our merch store, link provided in the description below. Get some Covalence gear and check out our courses. We got a ton of awesome courses. So again, if you want to reach out, you have any questions, do so. Otherwise, we'll see you soon.